The TLDR for this one, I put on the screen here, basically kind of like a pros and cons list. Ultimately, I really recommend the keyboard. I think the keyboard's great for a lot of different things, whether it be a wireless keyboard, a gaming keyboard, hot swappable keyboard, that kind of stuff. And so pros, I would definitely say the three modes of connection, whether it be wired, Bluetooth, or dongle, work pretty well. It's obviously a hot swappable, meaning you can take away the keycaps as well as the switches and replace them with other standard switches if you don't like the default switches. It comes with a magnetic wrist rest, and while it is plastic, it does snap on pretty easily and doesn't move too badly when you have it, in its usual position, and it's quite durable and feels good on your wrist. The colors, obviously, you can get these in a bunch of different colorways and a bunch of different kind of like configurations, whether it be like 96% or 100% or 10 keyless or whatever. So you can have a bunch of different varieties. But in this case, I kind of like the unique layout that the 96% allows me to have. It's more compact than a full keyboard, but it allows me to have more of those number keys if I ever need them. The switch type is also, I think, an advantage because this is using a very good switch type. In this case, it's like a yellow switch, which is a little bit, compared to like a Galeron yellow switch, it's a little bit between like a red linear switch and a brown switch. Obviously, you can replace that hot swappable, as we said. Battery life is also really good in this thing. It lasts a long time on a full charge, and you can always check it. And one thing I think that not a lot of people understand with this keyboard is that a lot of the functions on this keyboard don't require an app. You don't need to go through a software, go through an app to be able to get these functions. They're all hardware based, so you can do like function enter and get the battery life amount without having to go into software. And you can change lighting and all that without needing to go into a separate software app. This can be basically used completely without any software at all. And obviously the price, which I will talk about when we actually start it. Now for cons, there are a couple things. The main thing, right, is the default board and the default keys are not backlit keys. So basically that just means that they are not keys that show backlight through. So whether they have RGB or whatever color you choose, it does not show through the keys themselves, meaning that in darker situations, if there's not a ton of light, these won't be illuminated. So like in a typical environment, right, RGB going through the keys themselves allow it to illuminate and basically give it a natural backlight. These key caps here do not have that, right? They're solid all the way through, but obviously you can replace those, but just the default one that it comes with doesn't allow that. The other thing is the software currently, at least for me, does not work at all. I've tried reinstalling it, uninstalling it, kind of updating it as many times as it needs to, trying to connect, trying to use different firmware, all that. The software doesn't work, and it's a good thing that all these functions are on the keyboard themselves, because if I need to use software, it wouldn't work. But the software, I haven't been able to get to work. There's some things you can do with it. I haven't been able to get that functional. And then the other thing is hidden functions. Because the keyboard forgoes some of the keys on it, even though it's a 96%, you lose certain things like the scroll lock, the pause button, the insert, the home, page up and down, and delete key. So if you wanted any of those, you do have to hit the function key and use the middle of the keyboard, like the Y, U, I, H, J, K, M, N, and the caret buttons in order to do that. And you'll see it has a little bit of a script below that key that basically says what it does. And so to me, it kind of feels odd that we have all these keys here. We have this number pad, and all of those functions are not basically used from that, and instead are put on the keyboard itself. That's not a huge thing, but definitely something to keep in mind if you do end up using like the end key or the page up and down key a lot. Those are mapped to the middle of the keyboard instead of some other like function. All right, but I think overall, definitely pros definitely aware of the cons I have here, and I would definitely recommend this keyboard if anyone's looking for a cheap wireless keyboard. All right, so the first thing I really want to look at is the exterior, because I think the exterior is obviously the first thing that you kind of come across, and the first thing that you're going to be concerned about when you're trying to buy this keyboard is how's it, exterior, how does it look, and what's it kind of made of. So it's made of mostly plastic. It's also made of like a very deep plastic, basically. So like because it's a hot swappable keyboard, the plastic has to be very deep, so it's not very slim or compact keyboard. So if you're looking for something like that, you're definitely, this is not the keyboard for you. But ultimately, it's very deep. It has all the keys kind of like in a tub. So we have the base plastic and all the keys kind of rest in this tub. That's a little bit different from something like my other Fnatic keyboard, which was a little bit more streamlined, where it had basically just like a sheet of metal and you had the keys on top of that. This is more so the board itself and then all the keys sort of inside of it, right? Made of plastic. Plastic feels generally pretty nice. And then you ultimately go to the back and you see stuff like the feet that you can pop out, a place for the dongle that is an optional connector, All the information about the rating and the serial number and stuff is on the back as well. And it shows basically two different little buttons here. There's an on-off button that turns it on and off, and then there's a Bluetooth or a dongle kind of mode, one that doesn't use wires, but is obviously like a thing you have to plug into your computer rather than Bluetooth. There's a little switch there to basically toggle between them, which is nice. I don't have to worry about remembering another key combination. There's feet on every side, as we can see, and they help keep the keyboard stabilized, which I think is pretty well. And then going back to the front of the keyboard here, we can see that the keys are made of double-shot PBT caps, but they are, I believe, ABS plastic, so they might rub off with oil as time moves on. One thing I think is a little bit interesting is the function row is above typically where you would see the function row. It's a little bit more like compact with the other keys instead of being split apart. So if that is something that you might need to get used to, then that's obviously something that you should be aware of. And then in the front here, we have two USB, kind of like you can use this as a USB hub if you wanted. And then we have a USB-C charging cable. So if you plug this in and then use that, everything wireless, you do have two, I think USB 2.0 probably ports right there. So moving on from that, we also have to look at stuff like indications of battery and other sort of functions. So the first battery indication function, you just press function and enter, and it will show your battery indicator on the top from like 1 to 9. And I really like this because I don't have to go into the app and see what battery life I'm at. I can just press a button, and it's pretty easy, right? I don't have to have any software for that, and overall I'd say that works pretty well. Moving on to some other functions that are going to be important for you to know, we have RGB modes. Now this keyboard doesn't have traditional, always kind of active RGB. You kind of have to cycle through a bunch of modes, which isn't like a huge deal because there's a bunch of modes and you can customize them if the app worked. We'll get to that in a second. But basically you can press function and print screen, and that will basically change between the different modes, and then function and delete to change the colors around. And you can basically press those and arrow keys as well to do stuff like increase and decrease the brightness of these effects and slow down and speed up the speed of these effects. And you have a decent amount of control right off the bat without having to go into an app and be able to kind of customize it further, but you do have a decent amount of control on the keyboard itself. Next thing I really want to talk about is a sound test. So I think it's really important that this keyboard has a very good sound test and very good way of demonstrating sound and all that. So I'm going to let the sound test play here. So accessories and the user manual. The opening sort of setup here for the keyboard is pretty simple. You get a orange box and you open the orange box and it will contain your keyboard, user manual. It will contain extra hot swappable keys, cap puller, and a key switch puller, as well as a user manual that has all the functions and stuff if you want to. I would recommend keeping that because it's going to talk about different functions and how to access the app and how to change modes and that kind of stuff. The user manual overall I think is pretty good. Shows a picture of the keyboard that you got, the different modes, different functions, battery reminder, all that stuff. It also then shows the functions and how to use them, and overall that most of it's on the keyboard and all that, and everything's laid out. And it's also your keyboard, which is nice. So like this picture here on the custom backlight set is the keyboard I bought. It's not just like a random keyboard that they have a default picture for. And so I think that's just a really nice extra touch there. That's actually the thing you bought instead of some other random keyboard. So they can actually like tailor it to you, right? So it goes through the functions and all that and how to connect. And overall, I think it's pretty good. The charging cable here is also a little bit of a better quality because it has a adapter built into it. So if you have a C to C, you can do that, or you can put a little adapter on it and make it an A to C. So that's overall just a benefit that I think a lot of people kind of like take for granted. It's like, oh, if it doesn't work on a C to C cable, like your PC doesn't have one in the front or something, like mine doesn't. So overall, I think the accessories that you get for the keyboard are pretty good, and ultimately are, I guess, a value add compared to other keyboards that might not include that. So the last thing I really want to talk about here is some of my issues with the keyboard. I talked about this a little bit in the Dueling Didn't Watch section that I recorded after all this, actually, but ultimately my main issues with it are the fact that the backlight is not, so these keys don't have a backlight in terms of like the keys being, they're pretty opaque, right? They're not translucent, you can't see through them or anything, so the backlight's going to be around the keys and not, through the keys. And basically that just means that if you're in a darker environment, you're not going to get that shine through that you might get, and so it could be harder to see the keys. The other thing is that the main thing is that backlight, right? Some of the functions, as you can see, as I'm showing here, with like page down and insert, all that, have been relegated to like the middle part of the keyboard with a function key, like they're underneath the normal key, which is a little odd because you have other keys here that don't seem to do anything, like the was like 4 through 10, like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, where you maybe think those would go, because there's nothing under those. There isn't anything under those. Instead, they've been relegated to like the middle keys, which just means if you're using those at any consistent basis, you're going to have to remember where they are and hit the function key that's on the right side and access those instead of being able to use the number keys like you might be more used to. So overall, I think the problems with the keyboard are relatively small and not super big of a deal. The bigger deal, I think, generally speaking, isn't the fact that there's a couple problems with the keyboard. It's ultimately the fact that the software for the keyboard doesn't work even a little bit. Software for the keyboard, I tried, installing it and uninstalling it and redoing the drivers and trying to install new firmware. The software just doesn't work, and that obviously is affecting, your ability to enjoy some parts of the keyboard because you can't create custom profiles and you can't create custom like RGB models and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, because a lot of stuff is on the function row, right, I can do function enter C battery, function print screen and delete to change the RGB colors and brightness and all that. You don't really need to make the custom modes. I mean, obviously it would be nice to, but it's not as detrimental as, for example, the Logitech software or the Razer software not working, where you need to go into those softwares and be able to access that stuff. So while it is a problem, and it's something that, I'm going to dock the Royal Kludge on for, it's not ultimately something that I'm too concerned about in the long run. However, if you, like me, are obviously in the market, we're in the market for a keyboard and we're looking at other options, there are important alternatives. So the alternatives that I would basically recommend if I go on here is I would recommend the Keychron C2 or other Keychron models. I think the C2 is basically the one that's the closest to something that you would want for here, or the K4 as well. K4 is a little bit of a larger keyboard, but it's around the same concept where you have a 96% keyboard and you have, in this case, the Keychron is a little bit more expensive, but it also has backlight. So if you wanted that backlight and the backlight was like a thing you were really looking for, then you could get the Keychron K4 wireless. Pretty similar setup there, except it has a backlight. So again, but it doesn't have a wrist rest, so you kind of have to make that trade-off. Do I want a backlight or do I want a wrist rest? In this case, I was like, I really need a wrist rest. So the Keychron K4, the best recommendation in terms of what I would say is the best alternative. The other option is something like a Red Dragon K596, also a 96% keyboard. This does have the advantage of having that print screen, insert home, page up, page down, delete sort of setup right there. And it also has a little bit more traditional layout. So if you didn't like the layout of this keyboard and it was around the same price, not spending $100, spending, around 70, which is I think what this was, then you'll want to go with the Red Dragon K596. And then the ACO Mechanical Gaming Keyboard 3098B was another one that I saw. And the reason I like this one is because I liked the kind of compact nature of it and the uniformity of it. Just the way it was kind of set up. It was set up quite similar with the number key on the side, the arrows in the middle here, and then the rest of it there. This keyboard basically is just an alternative if you want something that's a little bit more plain, as well as something that has those same 3 wireless modes and works with Mac. I believe this one also works with Mac, but the software probably doesn't, which is fine because the software doesn't work anyway. I would recommend this one if you want something that's a little bit more subdued, that's not necessarily all grayscale and boring like the Keychron, and you want something that allows you to hot swap pretty easily like this one does, and ultimately you're looking for something that is in that same vein, is also cheap, because the Kcron one is like $110, so it is more expensive than like the 70. So ultimately, in a conclusion, I would really say that I'm gonna go to the website here actually. So in conclusion, I basically say that this keyboard, the RK96 Royal Kludge mechanical gaming keyboard, is really good. And pricing wise, again, I say it's around $70 or $80, and you can check that by going to Camo on Amazon and checking all their different options and stuff. And while it might not be in stock for a lot of different color waves, this is, I think, a keyboard that's really worth it, and really this is going to be a problem, but ultimately I didn't see any problem with it. But if you go to their official website, there's a 20% off right now. It probably is not anymore, but they have a bunch of different keyboards. So if you don't like my forest blue keyboard there, then you can get something other 96 or S98, which is a little bit more premium keyboard, but has a little bit of a different, layout and feel to it. And it's like what I kind of expected due to their software and due to their name is that they just kind of be this like random Amazon dropship company. And they are, and they have really good keyboards for the price, and really customizable keyboards for the price. Their site works well, it doesn't lag, it doesn't, crash or anything, and it has, relatively good pictures and that quality, and it's set up well, and it has actual reviews and stuff. And so I think you can definitely trust this company. They're not going to like scam you or anything like that. And overall, I was just really impressed basically with the quality of the keyboard, and all the things that I kind of have gripes with I knew beforehand, other than the software, right? Like I knew before I went to it what was a good idea or not. Last thing I'll say is that I also really like this chart here, where they basically show you all the different options and the variants, and then talk about in a little chart there. It's very easy to kind of compare, which is something that I find quite complicated to do nowadays. If you saw my Why Tech is So Complicated Now video, then you'll obviously understand that a lot of these things are quite, become complicated and become, oh, I forgot about this feature and that feature. And it's just really nice to have a keyboard that you can just buy and understand and know that you're going to be satisfied. Like you're most likely going to have a really nice wireless mechanical keyboard if that's what you were looking for. So overall, I recommend it. Other than those few gripes that I talked about in the beginning, I think it's ultimately definitely pretty worth it. So I'll see everyone in the